Hi, I'm Lou Scott, and this is the Geppetto Room, where you don't have to be creative to be creative. You just have to be you, because here we're going to explore and explain techniques, methodologies to help you make better decisions, transformative decisions, to enrich the way you live, the way you work, and the way you play in our state. Now today we're going to be talking about healthcare. Healthcare is very important because ultimately we have to pay for it. And healthcare now is in the throes of financial arrangements and so forth, and we're going to discuss that. We're going to discuss particularly healthcare providers who are nonprofit. Let me just explain a little bit about just their mission. The mission of a nonprofit is affordability. Obviously, we have to be able to afford the care that we get. The second thing they have to supply is accessibility. I mean, reasonable amount of time to see the right doctors at the right time. That's what they have. They have to apply that by mission. And the third one is accountability. We're hoping that the medicine that they practice on us is up to date and modern and so forth. Those three things are what they have to deliver. Now it seems right now, unfortunately, that we're not getting our money's worth. We're not paying. Now, I don't have up-to-date figures, my guest might have, but I looked at the census of 2020, and the cost of healthcare in Vermont was $14,000 per capita. That means you take the whole what we pay for healthcare, divide it by all the people, 600,000 people, and it comes up with the figure. $14,000 per capita is a lot of money, and we should be getting our money's worth. Well, right now, we're kind of not. Right now, the organizations in the government are dealing with the providers who want increases. I don't know whether the increase, we'll find out whether the increase is valid or not, but they want increases, and there's things that they can do. Now, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. Misinformation, data, comparison, very confusing. And that's why my guest is here today. My guest is Bill Schubart. Bill is a writer. He's also a newspaper writer. Not only that, but he does articles for the Digger, and he also does articles for other magazines. And he has an insight that's both inside and outside of the healthcare industry. Let me tell you why. At one point in time, he was a chair of a hospital in Vermont, a big hospital in Vermont. He was the chair of it on the board. And also, at one point in time in his life, he ran a company with over 200 people. Now, obviously, he had to take care of their health care. They had to take care of their health care on the board and then from the inside of his phone. So he's an expert. And he's been writing a lot of articles, and he has a lot to say about what should be done in our state. What we should be paying, what can be fixed, what can be fixed. And the data that we get today, I think will help us all make decisions on what we have to do. Obviously, because it's going to impact, healthcare is important, it's going to impact it. So with that, I'd like to introduce Bill Schubart. Bill, how are you?
I'm good, Lou. Thank you for having me on.
Let me ask you just one question.
Of course.
Just one question. We're going to have so many questions I'll ask you during the show. What's going on? What's going on now?
You're being very specific, as usual.
Oh, as usual. Yes, I'm very specific.
There's a lot going on.
I know it's limiting for you, so.
There's a lot going on, and I don't want to get into the weeds because it just gets so confusing. Healthcare, which is almost now 20% of the Vermont economy, is
20% of the economy.
Almost, yeah, just shy, and that's a big piece. The key issue, and this is the one I think that troubles me more than anything, is on the statute in Vermont, you cannot get what is called a certificate of need. Think of it just as a license to be a hospital, unless you agree to function as a nonprofit. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion lies. A nonprofit is driven by mission, not by profitability. They obviously have to make enough money to survive, but their goal is serving the mission, not earning more money. And the behavior of a lot, but not all, of Vermont's 14 hospitals is much more like a business. They're expansive, They're expensive. They're going through a lot of struggles. One of the justified struggles that they're dealing with is staffing. But a piece of that is their own fault. And it has to do with the difference between what they pay their top executives and what they pay the people actually providing the health care, like the nurses and primary care docs. When I was chair of Fletcher Allen, which became the University of Vermont Medical Center, and that's what it is today, I was also chair of the Physicians' Compensation Committee. And we had it backwards. We were paying specialists sometimes in excess of $1 million.
Wow.
And the primary care docs, which is where the first and most important care occurs, they were making anywhere from $140,000 to $180,000, which, given what the cost of their medical education, isn't a lot of money. And a lot of people would say, I'm what we used to call a barefoot doctor. That is somebody who is passionate about caring for people. They want to take care of people. It's their mission. And they get into the system. They realize they can't be a primary care doctor and pay their medical debt. They can't do it. They have to become a specialist. Then there's a phenomenon which is very common in the healthcare industry and also in education called moral injury. And moral injury, very simply, is when you are passionate about caring for people or teaching, and the institution you work for makes it virtually impossible to do that. That's called moral injury.
Conflict.
And it's an ethical conflict.
I
And
know-
the number of people I know who have left healthcare
because of the morality of it.
they don't want to be told you can have 15 minutes with each patient, or you can have 30 minutes with each patient.
So back to, I know you might be talking about it, but you compared the expense level or load of Vermont hospitals or Vermont to the state, to all United States in America.
Yeah.
What does that come out? What is our expense? What do you see that they can reduce? Right now they're asking for an increase, and their share, in my opinion, should be they should reduce some of their expenses. What is their load?
The key issue here is, what is the ratio in any hospital's budget between what they spend on administration, marketing, and management to what they spend on clinical care? And the UVM Health Network, which is 3 hospitals, Porter, Berlin, and Burlington in Vermont. They have hospitals in New York too, which is another problem. The amount of money they spend on administration and management is so far out of whack compared to peer hospitals with the same number of beds around the country.
Around the country.
Yeah,
give me
the
a
data that I've
specific-
seen, which is hardcore data, that comes to us from the national. This is national data. It's not just, you know, the old saying, "Bring me the data that supports my conclusion."
But it's a national data.
This is
comparative
national
against-
data. They're somewhere on a budget of about $1.8 billion per year. They're somewhere between $340 million and $550 million overexpensed on administration and management.
Compared to other hospitals that are around the country.
Compared to other
Say it again,
hospitals,
okay.
the
We're
same size.
overexpensed.
We're not comparing them to Mayo or Geisinger
right.
or any of the, we're comparing them to hospital with similar bed count.
Right. Number of beds and so forth like that.
Yeah.
So it could be $500 million.
Yes, at the high end, it's
Could be
$540 million.
Between 300 and $500 million.
And that's of a $1.8 or $9 billion budget. That's a lot of money.
Oh, theoretically, that expense could be reduced. I would think so.
Absolutely, and a lot of studies have been done on that. The Green Mountain Care Board, and I just want to say a word because I guess that's really going to be my message today. But for anyone who doesn't know, the Green Mountain Care Board is the statutory regulatory agency for all healthcare and insurance providers in Vermont. They are the people who review the performance and approve the rates and budgets of all of the hospitals in Vermont, and also the insurers, Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is a nonprofit in Vermont, and the for-profits like United Healthcare and so on. So, and that's the key problem, is the hospitals are really unhappy about being regulated. They don't like being told, no, you can't grow 15 to 20% per year, and you can't have 96% of the people who come to your hospital not be able to get an appointment for 6 months.
So the accessibility is lacking.
Accessibility. There's a term called population health, and it's comprised of 3 simple metrics: affordability, accessibility, and quality. And there are a lot of hospitals in Vermont that deliver really good quality, including your own right here in Rutland. But quality doesn't mean anything if you can't access it or you can't afford it.
We go back to the idea that one of the problems you say is that the nonprofit providers resent this board telling them what to do, and yet every year, as far as I know, they never get turned down. They get their certificates of needs for equipment. They get their increases. Have they ever been turned down?
Oh yeah, that, and again, I don't want to get into the weeds, but the Green Mountain Care Board was formed in statute in 2011, and they didn't do a whole lot to control costs or regulatory, what you'd expect a regulator to do. They didn't do a whole lot until about 2 years ago, when there was a lot of turnover on the board. And the people who came in, and I know most of them personally, are really serious about regulating, about managing cost, and about improving accessibility. They're really serious about it, and they are professionals themselves. The chair of the Green Mountain Care Board was the prosecutor for the Department of Justice against Purdue Pharmaceuticals.
Wow.
So they understand regulation.
So they're asking the nonprofit hospital, do something about your cost. If you want us to increase, you got to show us what's not the advantage of the increase, but why the increase. If you have so much kind of loose money running around, up to $500,000.
Exactly.
Do they say, do you have to do your part? That negotiation is going on now.
Yeah.
Are they saying to them, you have to do your part before it seems logical to me as a businessman. You do your part, I'll do my part.
Right.
Let's get rid of the cost first, and then we can see how much money you can get.
Exactly. And there are legitimate costs.
Yeah.
But there are staggering costs, some of which, frankly, are the high-level compensation. I mean, I don't know exactly what Dr. Eppen makes, but I know when John Brumstead left, who was on my board when I was chair, he was making $2.2 million all in. That's a lot of money in Vermont.
Do they compare on a national scale compensation to the size of a hospital?
There has been a comparison done, and UVM Health Network, which John was head of, is high. It's very high. I mean, if you're running a hospital the size of Mayo Clinic, it's a different story. But still, that's too much money in Vermont, especially when nurses are leaving because they don't make enough nursing to cover their nursing school costs. The amount of money they had to pay.
So then the hospital has to use traveling nurses, which cost more money.
Travelers now are slightly under $250 an hour.
Wow.
An hour. Right. And when I was chair, we did everything we could to reduce travelers to zero because we wanted opportunities for Vermonters. And we explained that nursing is not bedpans and making beds. You're actually taking care of people.
So there's a lot of reasons why these providers, these nonprofit providers, are asking for money. Because a lot of things are happening in Vermont. People are leaving, the population, there's no housing. There's a lot of things they have to contend with that are really not medical.
Yeah.
But yet still, they could do something about reducing their overhead. Their overhead, any business would reduce the overhead.
That's a really good point, Lou, because, we have a tendency to talk about healthcare as a problem. None of the problems in Vermont are isolated. People get sick when they don't have a place to live. People, try drugs when they can't get health care or mental health care. Somebody who can't afford education and is lower on the economic spectrum because of it, they may not be able to afford a house, or they may not be able to get a job. These issues are all connected. What I've always said is, you want to measure the state of an economy, count the number of people in the emergency room and the number in jail. And that will give you an indication. And as I'm sure you know, the United States incarcerates more people per capita than either Russia or China.
Interesting. So the idea, so that we understand that there's other circumstances in the state that is biasing or at least causing a lot of the costs. But on the other hand, it seems to me that they're not controlling the costs. I worked in a hospital for 10 years. The cost seems to be, kind of loosey-goosey, much more loosey-goosey than it would be in a corporation.
Well, the other piece is that I want to say, and I want to show one other indicator. Everybody, I expect, is familiar with the term medical debt. Compared to other states, Vermont has, and I'm going to ask to put a map up behind me. Yeah, there we go. You'll see Vermont is black. Vermont has, per capita, among the worst medical debt in the United States of America. You can see it.
The worst medical debt.
Worst medical debt. That is the number of people.
The population is not paying its bills?
No.
What?
It's the fact that they can't afford to. And this is something that really triggered me. When UVM Health Network settled with United Healthcare, you may have seen in the news there was a fight. United Healthcare wasn't willing to pay their costs and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, they negotiated a deal. And the press release said, and anybody who comes to our emergency rooms will be treated regardless of whether they have the money or the insurance. Well, that's very gracious, except it's required by law.
It's not a real benefit.
Yeah, this is not like us going over and above.
But it does
This is required for a nonprofit. You treat anyone who shows up. The problem is, if you come in and you have no insurance, and you have, you can't afford to pay the bill, they send you a bill. And if you go into the emergency room, that bill is going to be in the thousands. That's why medical debt.
Do they try to collect it?
Oh yeah. No, I have a family member who went in and he was in between two insurance policies, and between what he pays in debt to the hospital and what he pays now for his medical insurance, he's paying $2,000 a month.
Wow.
Okay? So you can do the numbers. His net income is about $60,000. So he's paying a third of his total money.
So the total figure of debt is on the population. The population owes this money. That's the debt.
No, in the map that you're seeing, the debt is the number of people who are carrying medical debt, individuals, per capita.
Per capita.
And Vermont is among the 6 highest states in the country.
They're carrying debt. So one of the reasons is they're paying too much for it, maybe.
No. The reason is they went into the hospital They didn't have insurance, or they didn't have enough insurance, or whatever, and the hospital billed them. And the hospital calls it charity care, but they still bill them.
How can it be both? That's the dichotomy.
What they will say, and they are correct about this, for example, if you go in and you're in the hospital 5 days and you get a bill for $38,000, which is what a relative of mine got. And he said, I don't have this, I can't afford this. They negotiated it down to...
And that's what they collect.
That's what they collect, yeah, and that's the medical debt.
Medical debt. With all the problems, obviously, the problems that the hospital brings forward by not controlling its costs, which I think could be done, and all the problems the state has with population housing, we covered that and so forth. It's obvious. You have any ideas about how it can be changed, what they have to do? Or do we have to keep increasing this and get to a point where, we can?
Well, a big piece, yes, and that is the right question, Lou, exactly. The nonprofit hospital, UVM Health Network, and a problem also, I'll get into it later, is the Vermont Association of Hospitals and Health Systems. They are hammering the legislature, but I'll come back to that. I think the key issue is they behave like an expanding business rather than a nonprofit. I've always said nonprofits collaborate, they don't compete. Hospitals in Vermont, not all, but the big ones are competing ferociously. They're buying up other systems.
Right. They want all the population.
They want all the revenue. Yeah. And the reality is, it's exactly the wrong way to build a healthcare system.
The motive is the more population they have, the more leverage they have with insurance companies.
Yes.
If I can control.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily the key issue. And when you get into insurance, it's complicated because there are for-profits and not-for-profits, But I think the most important thing I would want to say, I'm a big fan of reverse engineering, and you and I have talked about that. If you were to build a healthcare system today, what would be the most cost-efficient way to do it? You would have primary care in the community where people can access it and where it's much cheaper. You would then have what are called FQHCs, or federally qualified health centers. And Senator Sanders has been a huge supporter of these. You'll see them dotted around the state. Then you have critical access hospitals like Rutland, Brattleboro, Bennington. And then you have the two tertiary care hospitals, UVM Medical Center and Dartmouth. That's the thing. If you deploy those through the countryside, it is infinitely less expensive. If I have some pain, I don't know what it is, and I go to my local primary care facility, which is a clinic, they can treat me for a fraction of the price than if I go and spend 16 hours in the emergency room waiting for someone to see me. But the health network wants all that business, and there's no more expensive way to provide primary care than in an emergency room. It's the most expensive way to do it.
I heard that argument many years, the idea of more primary care, and then the students don't want to go to primary care because there's more money in specialties and so forth, and who should be practicing. There's a lot of nonsense in the healthcare industry. One of the things that always struck me as very kind of ridiculous is that the pharmacist knows more about drugs than the doctors because he studies more about it, and yet he can't prescribe. A person who gets his knowledge most of the time in some journals, but from the pharmaceutical guy coming through the door, that's where he gets his knowledge. And yet it's like hiring a carpenter to do your electrical work. It's not going to happen.
Lou,
There's a lot of
Don't get me started on pharma. This show will go from 30 minutes to 7 hours. You realize Vermont no longer has any independent pharmacies at all? None. They're all gone now.
They're all part of
They're all part of what's called again, I don't want to get
Okay.
into it. Talk about an unregulated industry that spent $730 million lobbying Congress last year.
One of the ideas you have is re-engineering. One way to do one of the ideas is looking at the problem in different ways, more primary care. One of the ideas is the hospital should be reducing its overhead, like any business.
The hospital should either be a critical access hospital, like Porter or like Rutland or Berlin or Copley, or they should be a tertiary care hospital like Dartmouth, but nobody should go to those until they've been referred up the chain. You're not going to do, well, you could do a hip replacement at Copley because that's standard now, but you're not going to do a heart transplant, in a primary care clinic. You move up the chain to where it's most cost efficient.
In the last moments that we have time. What can the people do? Right now, there's a a state organization debating with the hospitals the cost. They want interest. They want increase, and they're debating all this. What can the public do?
Okay, this is
because they're the ones that ultimately have to pay for the whole thing.
I'm going to ask anybody watching this show to really take a look. You don't have to get down in the weeds, but what is happening very simply is UVM Health Network is lobbying the daylights out of the legislature and the business community. They're lobbying like crazy to get them to support essentially eliminating the authority of the Green Mountain Care Board.
They don't want any authority over
They
them.
don't want any authority.
They want to set their own prices, do their own thing.
And there's a term I often use in the legislature called shadow language. If I asked Dr. Eppen, who's the CEO of UVM Health Network, do you believe in regulation? He would say, oh, absolutely, of course I do. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I believe in regulation, but
I want to do it.
I mean, here's how it should be done. And I guess my really call to action would be, and I'm not normally this kind of person, but my call to action would be contact your legislator and make really clear to them that you do not want the hospitals eliminating the regulatory authority of the Green Mountain Care Board. The Green Mountain Care Board is the only thing between you and a hospital system totally out of control expense-wise.
Well, okay. I want to thank you for being here. Appreciate it. We got to come back because there's a lot of other issues. You could talk about this for many, many hours. And you made the conclusion that I can't make. You made it. You want the people to actually, and say that again. You got the time again. What do you want them to do? What's the action?
What I think is really important is, again, you don't need to understand all the politics of it, but I can promise you, as somebody who's been involved in healthcare since I chaired the largest hospital in the state, the effort of the Vermont Association of Hospital and Hospital Systems and the UVM Health Network to work the legislature very carefully to essentially eliminate the regulatory authority of the Green Mountain Care Board will make healthcare in Vermont worse than it already is. So make clear to your legislature that the Green Mountain Care Board must not be compromised.
Okay, you heard it. And you heard it on the Geppetto Room, and I can't make any better conclusion than that. We got to get active because the bottom line is, whatever happens here, if it gets unregulated as it can be, we're going to be paying for it. That 2020 figure is a low figure. We're paying more. We're going to keep paying more. And with all the other problems that we have, I don't think we can. So that's it for today. I'm Lou Scott, and this is the Geppetto Room, where you don't have to be creative to be creative. Until next time.